at what point do you draw that line as far as spending too much time on podcast quality and possibly not getting your podcast episode out and not having a high enough quality podcast? I know for me personally, I put a lot of work into my podcasts, but it does take a lot of time. So, for instance, as an example, the particular podcast hosting company that I use has a situation where it causes the first two, when you add dynamic content to your podcast, which is a really cool feature. I love it and I recommend it. It actually causes the first dynamic content pieces to have empty chapters, and that causes problems with the chapters. So I have created a personal podcast hosting, kind of hijacking the hosting process. But it takes a lot of time to do that every week. It means that I actually have to set up a system at Apple where Apple is pointed to my server, my own server, as the podcast host rather than the place where I actually host the podcast. That is a lot of work. Every single podcast episode that I publish, I have to go through at least 15 minutes of extra work. 15 minutes doesn't sound like a lot of work, but if you have 3 podcast episodes every week, that's an additional 45 minutes every week just to do those 2 chapters, just to correct those 2 chapters. So you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? Is that a requirement that you have for your podcast? Is podcast quality that important? So you have to ask yourself, what kind of podcaster are you? Are you the type of podcaster that requires quality, high quality, and you want your audience to view your podcast as a podcast that represents podcast quality? If that's the case, then you're the type of person that will actually go the extra mile and spend that 45 minutes each week, just like I do on my podcast. But if maybe quality isn't the most important, maybe you need to sit down and evaluate your podcast and list, say, the top 5 things that come to mind about your podcast and what you want your audience to think about or recall about your podcast. Maybe your podcast is all about comedy or about interactive features, the interaction of the podcast itself. Maybe you have your podcast out on the street interacting with people as they're going about their life. And in that case, you're not necessarily going to have the most high quality sound. So that's a different type of podcast. List the top 5 things that come to mind that you want your audience to think. And if high quality is not one of those top 5, then there would be no reason that you need to spend the extra time to make sure that your podcast is high quality. But I would think that high quality is something that is likely to be a common feature, a common requirement, a common desire for a lot of podcasters, because they wouldn't want to be listed as a low quality podcast. But I think it is something that you have to decide for yourself as a podcaster. Another thing is the timing of your podcast, how frequent, the quality of your research, your resources, your guests. All of that can come into the concept of quality. Hey, good, Martin has joined us, and we can ask Martin what Martin thinks about quality. We'll give him a moment to get situated here. Martin, hi there. We were just talking about quality. I was describing chapters. We're live. We were talking about quality and describing like the chapters. We go through 45 minutes per week on setting up chapters. And what do you think? Should podcasters be concerned about quality of their podcasts?
Yes, what did you say, Deborah? I hear you a bit low. Maybe it's my settings.
Pardon me?
Yeah, now I hear you better.
Oops, now I don't hear you that well. Let
Hello?
me see. Yep.
Maybe maybe it's my settings. Wait a second.
What do you
Let,
think about podcasters and quality as far as I mentioned that I think that podcasters need to evaluate what's important about their podcast is if quality is one of like what's their top 5 things about their podcast and have their audience like what do they want their audience to think about for their podcast. Maybe their podcast is done on the street, like they're interviewing people on the street and the audio quality isn't that great, so
yeah,
maybe podcast quality is not one of their top 5 things, but I would think that podcast quality is something that comes up a lot for podcasters. Like if they're going to list their top 5, I think
yeah,
podcast quality is probably one of the 5.
yeah.
And then
And in quality, you have different ways. It's like you have quality of content, as you say, how you measure
mm-hmm,
that. And then it's of course up to the host and individuals who produce it, but also of course listeners will decide if I want to listen to you because it's so many options out there. And but then if you have a live show or in the moment and it's very, as I said, in a busy street, then it's especially the content and you could
right,
oversee, or how do you say it, with that. And quality have developed over time. I know when I started, then it was hard to get it if you didn't do it everything yourself. So it
right,
had been easier. And sometimes maybe the listeners are picker, and I think it's a bit, how to say, challenge for us indie podcasters. I mean, you, Deborah, you are top of the notch, and you have Michael and so on. But not everyone have that equipment and resources and knowledge about it. And if you compare, especially here in Sweden, if you compare everything with studio produced and often by so-called the government and others, we have that situation in Sweden, like radio. Radio is like state funded by the tax
mm-hmm,
money. And they have jumped into podcasting also. It's still a radio program, but you could listen to it as a podcast.
um,
And then you have others that have huge backing. And then you compare, like a radio drama, for example,
right,
with all the
right,
bells and whistles.
mm-hmm,
And you know that from as a musician. I mean, you could have a whole crew behind you
right,
helping you with
right,
the music. And
right,
for the regular indie podcasters, you don't have that way of doing it. But I think you should do it good enough and listenable, and you will get that feedback.
right, right,
So,
right,
and then what I have challenged with, and it's the regularity, like a newspaper. Listeners maybe have a few podcasts that they listen every time. Now I again shout out to Sam Setti. I'm listening more and more to podcasts now and finding new podcast thanks to true fans,
mm-hmm, yes,
because it you get, somebody is listening to that, Deborah is listening to that, maybe I should look at that because I appreciate you, and I maybe we have the same taste in that podcast or something new. So
right,
then your podcast consumption is increasing. So I think quality in different ways, but I think you should strive for it, and then
okay.
always be open to constructive criticism.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And
Yeah,
I think
and
about
I missed because I had to get something before I started, and today is a long Friday, or Good Friday as you say in English.
oh yes, yes, happy
And
Good
you're
Friday.
back in the day when I was born. You were not allowed to do any fun thing at all. You couldn't watch movies, whatever. So
Oh
the
wow,
record a
wow.
podcast on this day
Whoa.
is happy moment. But anyway,
Well,
so
sorry.
I heard you talking about chapters,
Yes.
and I will do my own episode of that on teaparty.media, because I'm challenging that, because I don't have that creative to create the so-called chapter markers images. I don't have
Mhm.
that skill, but if I have a tool, if it's Canva or if I do a freelancer thing or whatever, or maybe the host will fix it for me, but I
Right.
upload the image and it will work because I don't want to break the RSS feed.
Right. Right. Right.
So for me, and also find the workflow. If I have done the recording, editing, post production, when will I find a way of putting in the chapters? But now before this show, I start listening to Podcast News Weekly Review, and it's 2 hours long. So it's special for this holiday, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
And they had like 16 chapters. Of course, not
Oh wow.
everyone is with
Wow.
an image. It's like the
Right.
default image. But for me,
Right.
it's like, okay, a hurdle. When will I get to this? Because I want it, I support it. But when will I be
Right.
able to get? If I have a short podcast, like 10 minutes, and I have like 2 images, I could find, what was that one? Fizz. We have tested that. Oh, it starts with SF, I think. Then you could manually go in and log in on this service and get they generated the chapters for you, and then you upload it on your host. And I
Well, they
haven't
do
started
that on.
using Spark AI yet, but I will pay for that soon and see how that's working. I know it's challenge there also. Do
Mm-hmm.
things that we probably have a special episode of that you have really found a workaround and so on. But that I think could be a good thing. So
But you can.
chapters is good, but still it has to be promoted from different angles so the listener wants to have it also. Because listeners,
Right.
now I'm really on my soapbox. Mostly the listeners have the podcast application on their phone in their pocket,
Right.
I
You
think.
can
But
add
I
images
personally have
in
started
Captivate.
using more and more on the web, and I want to see what's going
Right.
on. So yeah,
Right. You can add images in Captivate. You know that, right?
yeah. But I haven't come
In
to
the.
that yet. I need to,
Okay.
go through the
Okay.
tutorial and then again find the
Right.
workflow. How will
Right.
I work with it? But
Right.
thanks
Right.
again for that.
Right. I have, I've noticed that. And I even thought about doing that yesterday when I was doing the podcast. But again, it comes down to you have to evaluate what's important in your podcast when you're putting it together. Because I thought that extra 15 minutes that I spend trying to host it then on my own server,
Yep.
in order to have the no errors on the chapters,
Yep.
then I don't have the time to go back and actually put the images in. But I really did think about going back because I had a chapter that was featuring someone that we'd met, and I thought, well,
Yeah.
we can just grab this picture and put that in for a chapter picture, and that
That's
would be
neat.
great. But it was like I got to get this podcast out,
Yeah.
and I
So
don't
I
have the
think
time.
that's
I got to pick. Which one
yeah.
am I going to do? Am I going to have the quality for the chapters, or am I going to go
Yeah.
add the chapter image?
And Sam said that really. I mean, they have now they have so experience. So they like the Pod News Weekly. It says it's in the name, so it has to be weekly. But when things
Right.
lives could come and things could happen, that's more important, and that's okay also. But
But
it
you
define
brought up a good
yeah,
point, though. You could have a default image,
yeah,
and look at the RSS feed. That's a little easier. If you have a default image, you can just go in there and replace in the RSS feed very easily that link to that default image. Just replace it with another image, and that
okay,
makes it a little easier. So, I mean, that when you said that, I thought, hey, that works. Then you just put a default image, kind of like a placeholder.
yeah. And now maybe we stir up a bit commotion again, and you have to get me back on track again. But I listened to it was an interview with somebody from Spotify. Really, now we are really pushing video. So now one on Sound Profitable, I think, the co-founder there, he said, we have to really be aware of which road we are going to. If you have a video podcast, and we are doing now live streaming,
Mm-hmm.
and you think it's fun, and I think it's fun, but I have come to my own conclusion. I want to have live streaming and live item tag, but I have to
Yep.
find adding value to it
Right.
because
Right.
lots of people want to be 15 minutes of fame and they want to be the next YouTuber or whatnot. And Spotify is changing YouTube here. And she said that really good in a good way. If you are in video, you have an opportunity here. If you
Right.
only are into audio podcast, the original form of podcasting, even if video was back in the day also, you maybe have to think about it.
Sure.
So, because
Yep.
that's an extra layer on quality. I mean, to
Right.
see
Right.
the lightning and everything and so on. And again, the listeners, you have to, if we are doing this value for value, we have to be so-called brave to ask What do you
Yep.
think, listeners? Do you think this an added value to have chapters? I think so. Transcripts,
Yep.
I think that
Yep.
too.
Yep.
Um, Show notes, that's also an art or skill
Yep.
to make everything around that.
Yep. But and I want to
Because
add the
it's a whole
live. I mean,
production.
yep.
The as you know from movies, at the end of the movies, what is coming at the end? What is called?
Oh, the credits. The
Yeah,
credits.
and
Yep.
you say, "Wow, lots
Yep.
of people involved in this movie."
Yep, exactly. I look at it and I go, cha-ching, cha-ching.
Yeah,
You know, it's
yeah,
like, wow, no wonder this costs so much. I mean, you have to
yeah,
pay everybody something. And I
yeah,
remember that even Mac's husband was an actor. Even before that, and he was, he was going in and getting paid $100 a day, just as an extra or whatever. That adds up. If you've got like 40 people in a scene with a crowd scene, and each one of those people is getting $100, even $25 back in the day. It was
yeah,
like that adds up after they're going to work every single day in their crowd scene, and you've
yeah,
got 40 people or 100 people. Look at those like mob scenes on movies.
yeah,
They're all getting money. Every
yeah.
single one. That they're not necessarily doing it for free. Well, in some cases, you can. People say, "Oh
Yeah,
yeah, I want
like
to be in the movie,
how do you
whatever."
say that in English? In Swedish is statist. A person that it will be in the scene, like me. I'm not an actor, but they want to have a guy with a cap or in
Yeah.
that whatever, and then you probably get credits, but not so much more. But still, it's
Right.
a
Right. But yeah,
so
then
and
he
you need
used
to
to
have these
have
extras or whatever it's called.
extra. That's what they
Yeah,
call it, extra. But yeah,
statist in
he
Swedish. Yeah,
used to call in on the phone line and
yeah,
and get these casting calls for
yeah,
extra. That's how he made money. Was he going to be extra? But I mean, when you look at a movie or even a TV show, even just that adds up. Even
yeah.
if it's not the acting fee, it's
And
just for the extras. The
and
amount of
that's
extras. You look at one of those cop shows. I watch
yeah,
SVU, and all the people, all the cops that are walking through and passing,
yeah.
and
Everyone
they're
have to.
waving, and it's
Yeah,
an extra with interaction with a principal part. Even though they're not talking, they're
mm,
an extra. They're not an actor. They're just an extra, and they'll just like wave to the
yeah,
cop. Now they could be an actor, but then they have to get paid more. But an extra can just kind of wave to the cop, but they'll still only be paid the lesser fee, the $25. But all those people, that adds up because
yeah.
that's every single scene, and it's like, wow, that you think
And
about that, and it's expensive to put together a show.
yeah, and that's why they have a challenge also now, the movie industry, because you have
Yep,
on every 100 movies or whatever, I don't know, will be a hit. The rest will
yep,
be maybe only break even or not even that. It could be promotion for other things.
yep.
Like
It
I heard that I think in on Post now, but it was a voiceover actor, so he had a podcast, and I think I mentioned that before to you. It's like a bit science fiction, a bit spacey. And so he has lots of characters in his podcast, and like for 10 minutes or
mm-hmm,
50 minutes. But he's doing all these voiceover and voices and characters by himself. And you
mm-hmm,
could think how much work in that production. It's short
yep,
podcast,
yep,
but he was like a Dragon Ball, like this fantasy or thing, and he did voiceover there for the movie, and that's huge movie and big. I know my brother's son is into that, reading the cartoons,
mm-hmm,
uh, but I think he got paid for what he did, not like the voiceover, not all the royalties from the movie. It's like
right,
his
right,
small part.
right, right,
But it's still adding up. So the movie industry will have a challenge with that. But that could be also for the podcasters and indie creators with a service like True Fans. It will be music. It will
mm-hmm,
be probably like short movies or whatever. It could
yep,
be books.
yep, yep,
And then the listener, watcher, moviegoer, whatever, could decide what is it worth to me,
exactly,
and then
exactly,
pay it forward. And this is
exactly,
real. I think this is the most important regarding quality. If we will continue to work like
right,
indie podcasters to get
right,
something, if you value it, how could you pay it forward in different ways? Like maybe helping with chapters
yep,
or helping with I don't know what, but spreading the good word. If you have the talent in other things like that, and of course that you're listening to it, sending a
right,
super comment or a boostergram,
yep,
streaming Satoshi, I think that will be the biggest thing in the long run. when you make an active decision that every month I want to spend roughly like $10 or whatever on different podcasts, on different musicians, like as you are doing now with other music services. It's about the same amount, and you could listen how much you want. But now I want to support Deborah's. I really think, Deborah, you should go into this with your music, your own music, because I see that, wow, this will adding up in a positive way for the long run. So
I'll have to work on that.
yeah, and it's
We'll have
work
to talk
again. Again, it's
offline. Yeah, on that. But
but you
hey,
have the material, and you have
yep,
the skill, and it's so valuable. It's so called in air quotes should be out to new listeners and old listeners and so on. Your music.
thank you,
So I
appreciate that.
definitely think because I see that's coming as like Adam Curry has been a MTV DJ, and he knows the industry. So
Thank
this
you,
was very interesting. So it's lots
appreciate
about
that.
quality, and yeah, we are trying to do that our best again to get the feedback, the support, and like tips on topics and whatnot.
Yeah. Well,
And
hey,
yeah,
while you're at it, how about a shout out, and then I'll give a call to action for
yes, please
our
do.
go ahead with a shout out. Choose a shout out for this episode. Do you want to do true fans or?
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, I really see what's going on. So true thanks to Sam Setti of and his colleagues, of course, working on that, like programmers and others, and to Sam Setti of truefans.fm. And thanks again, Sam,
Yay!
for the next episode. I will because it's and I'm late on that, but in I have a bag here with a boom arm, so then you will see my lovely face also.
Oh, excellent. Okay. And a call to
And thanks
action.
again for the shout out to you and Michael. With
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I really
Thank you.
like
I
them.
love it. Yes,
The
yes, I recognize those.
yes,
I'm trying to think if I'm wearing, no, I'm wearing, oh, I do have those at my other desk. I have the same brand. Yes. Thank
and
you.
that's the company AKG in Swedish or HG. How do you say it in English?
AKG?
Yes,
Yes,
and
yes, I do.
K92.
And
It's
actually,
designed
these
in
are,
Vienna, Austria, but
yeah,
it's an American company now.
these are also AKG. They're not
Yeah,
the ones you are wearing. I would show you, but they're actually hanging up on a hook over
yeah.
there.
I
Over
like the
there.
golden touch to it. It's
Yeah,
really
this is now I can't remember which ones these are, but they're cousins of the
yeah,
so they're related. Um, I think for a call to action, how about people actually sit down and say what are the five things that they want their audience to think of for their
good.
podcast, and if quality is one of them, great. If not,
Mm,
then just disregard everything I said and disregard everything about it on that one. But I would think that probably quality is very likely to be one of the five for a lot of people.
yeah.
But
So,
anyway, that's
and I
just
think the human touch because you have played around that with the AI agents and adding up to that, and I think that's a good tool. But maybe we'll see in the future a flood of AI, 100% AI generated stuff. And then maybe it will be so-called inequality in one way with the content,
yep.
but will it have a human touch?
That's a good point. That'd be a nice secondary discussion after people can come up with their list.
Yep.
Because how does
But
that work
but
with
but
AI?
again, and now I'm on my as a editing. We all have our ticks.
Yep.
So, and that's something with quality to think about it because you don't think about it in the conversation. But when you record it, you have all these filler words, whatever. That
Yep.
could be human touch. But
Yep.
if it's too much, it
Yep.
could be annoying for the listener.
I notice that when I'm editing my podcasts and I hear the or the or whatever, and I'm
Yeah, and I'm
removing all
saying
of them,
okay, and yeah,
and
it's all
it's like
good.
it's like
But you could
oh
have
man.
saying and have a thinking pause. That's an important thing also. The
Yes.
silence could be
Yes.
really important to
Those
keep.
pauses.
Yeah.
It gives that human
Yep.
aspect that's very important. Yeah, and that's something to talk about with AI. Maybe we should have an episode about AI because there's some AI that doesn't. What was it? The Notebook LM that
Yeah.
does it. They have a lot of the response is okay, okay, okay,
Yeah, I have
okay.
heard like
It's too much, and
it's too much because they have
it's like
learned from how we are talking, so they are
yes, yes,
mimicking it.
yes,
They
and it's
say,
like
"Okay,
ooh, it's like cut
cool."
that down. Yeah, it's like that's too much. That's too much. But I think Federa does a better job.
Yeah.
on that one. There's not as much of that, but we should have a whole episode
Yes.
on podcasting. Maybe
And
we
we
should do that.
also
Yeah.
have one on how when you're relying, for example, generating transcripts and so on. I heard, but I don't want to uh, do a point out there, but I heard that on also on Pod News that some tool are in a way missing this transcript, and if you're relying on it like 100%, that could be hard. But we have to look into that. But we will talk about that in the future. So
Great
yeah,
announcement for upcoming
yep,
podcasts. So thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you same time next time we see you at
yep.
Studio Fusion. Thank you, Martin.
Thanks, Deborah.